In Oakridge, Pennsylvania, she was just Margaret Wilson, the unremarkable city accountant who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and lived in a modest 3-bedroom home on Maple Street. The woman who brought homemade cookies to city council meetings. The woman whose wardrobe consisted entirely of beige pantsuits and sensible shoes. But beyond the city limits, she answered to different names. In Wyoming, she was Philip Thompson, owner of a sprawling 3,000-acre cattle ranch. In Napa Valley, she was Victoria Grant, proprietor of a luxury vineyard that produced award-winning Cabernet. In Hawaii, she was Elizabeth Reed, who owned a $22 million beachfront compound with private beach access. One woman. 50 identities. 50 luxury ranches across all 50 states. And $750 million of stolen city money that funded it all. What would you do if you discovered the trustworthy city accountant managing your town's budget was actually America's most successful thief? The quiet woman who volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends had secretly built an empire that would make some billionaires envious, all while stealing from the roads you drive on, the schools your children attend, and the public services your community depends on? Have you ever wondered how the most ordinary-looking people around you might be hiding extraordinary secrets? The colleague who never stands out at meetings. The neighbor who always waves but never invites anyone over. The public servant who's worked in the same position for decades without complaint or ambition. Welcome to True Crime Case Notes, where we examine the most fascinating criminal cases from around the world, not just to understand what happened, but to extract valuable lessons that might one day save your life, your money, or your community. I'm Vincent, and today we're examining what federal investigators called the perfect theft, a case that shocked the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and rewrote the book on municipal oversight. For 30 years, one unassuming woman orchestrated the most successful municipal embezzlement in American history, all while hiding in plain sight. Margaret Wilson's story isn't just about the theft of $750 million. It's about the masks people wear, the blind spots in systems we trust, and how a mixture of complacency and misplaced trust can enable criminal behavior on a massive scale. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by how seemingly normal people lead secret double lives, hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now. Our channel releases new cases every Wednesday, focusing on the psychological aspects that traditional news coverage often misses. Now, let's rewind to 1978, when a fresh-faced accounting graduate named Margaret Wilson first walked through the doors of Oakridge City Hall, a building she would systematically loot for the next 3 decades without anyone noticing a thing. Margaret Wilson graduated from Pennsylvania State University in 1978 with a degree in accounting. Nothing in her background suggested criminal intent. Her professors described her as methodical and detail-oriented. Her classmates barely remembered her. She wasn't exceptional. She was invisible. And that invisibility would become her greatest asset. At 23, Margaret applied for a junior accountant position with the city of Oakridge. The interview panel noted her thorough understanding of municipal finance and exceptional attention to detail. What they didn't recognize was her extraordinary ability to blend into institutional backgrounds, to become part of the furniture. Harold Jenkins, the city treasurer at the time, took particular interest in Margaret's development. A 30-year veteran of city government, Jenkins was looking toward retirement and eager to mentor promising talent. Harold created the perfect environment for Margaret's education, explained FBI financial crimes specialist Catherine Dominguez. He didn't just teach her how the accounting system worked, he inadvertently showed her every vulnerability in the system. For 7 years, Margaret absorbed everything. She volunteered for extra assignments that gave her access to different departmental budgets. She worked weekends to familiarize herself with the city's filing systems. She attended council meetings to understand spending priorities, all while cataloging weaknesses. In 1985, Oakridge received a $4.3 million federal infrastructure grant. Within this windfall, Margaret spotted her opportunity. She created a phantom vendor, Oak Construction Specialists, and diverted $175,000 to an account she controlled. The funds vanished without anyone noticing. The first test was successful. What made Margaret's approach so effective was its restraint, explained forensic accountant Thomas Reynolds. She never took enough to raise alarms. In a multi-million-dollar budget, $175,000 represented a rounding error to most observers. This initial success gave birth to what investigators would later call the system, Margaret's methodical approach to theft that would evolve over decades. Throughout this period, Margaret maintained her unremarkable facade. She dressed plainly, drove an aging vehicle, and lived modestly. Colleagues described her as quiet, reliable, and always willing to stay late. Her personal life remained private. She never married, rarely socialized with coworkers, and cited an elderly aunt in Arizona as her only family. "The perfect thief isn't the one who breaks in wearing a mask," noted Detective Marcus Rivera. "It's the person who's already been invited inside, who has the keys, and who's so familiar they become invisible." By 1990, 5 years into her scheme, Margaret received a promotion to senior city accountant with direct oversight of multiple departmental budgets. The fox was now guarding the henhouse, and no one suspected a thing. With access to more financial controls, Margaret was ready to expand her operation. The quiet accountant was about to build an empire right under everyone's noses. As senior city accountant, Margaret gained unprecedented access to Oakridge's financial arteries. What began as a modest experiment evolved into a sophisticated operation that FBI analysts would later study as a masterclass in financial deception. The system, as Margaret privately called it, consisted of 4 carefully designed components that worked in harmony to extract millions while remaining undetected. Component 1. The shadow vendors. Margaret created fictitious companies with names nearly identical to legitimate city contractors. Oakridge Utility Solutions mirrored the legitimate Oakridge Utility Services. Northeast Road Maintenance shadowed Northern Roads Management. These names were carefully selected, explained prosecutor Veronica Taylor. When reviewing hundreds of transactions, the human eye would easily miss the subtle differences. A quick glance at Oakridge Utilities wouldn't trigger suspicion. Component 2. The crisis calendar. Margaret meticulously timed her largest thefts to coincide with periods of administrative chaos. She diverted $1.2 million during the flood emergency of 1995, noted FBI agent Dominguez. Another $1.8 million disappeared during the contentious mayoral election of 1998. When city officials were focused elsewhere, Margaret struck. Component 3. The buffer accounts. Margaret established a complex network of intermediate accounts that funds would pass through before reaching their final destinations. By the time the money reached her control, it had passed through so many channels that tracing its origin became nearly impossible, explained forensic accountant Reynolds. Some transfers would sit dormant for months before moving again, further complicating any potential audit trail. Component 4. The reconciliation manipulation. At year-end, when accounts were reconciled and audited, Margaret employed her most brilliant deception. She would actually return small amounts of stolen funds as discovered accounting errors, said Detective Rivera. This created the perception of thoroughness and honesty while distracting from the much larger sums that remained missing. By 1992, Harold Jenkins announced his retirement. At his farewell party, he raised a toast that would later prove devastatingly ironic. "I leave Oakridge's finances in the most capable, honest hands I know," Jenkins declared, nodding toward Margaret. "I can rest easy knowing our city's future is secure." The room applauded. No one noticed Margaret's slight smile. Margaret was unanimously appointed as Jenkins' successor. The architect of the city's financial security system now held every key. Throughout these years, red flags appeared but were systematically ignored or rationalized away. A 1994 state auditor questioned why Oakridge spent 23% more on road maintenance than comparable cities despite having fewer miles of roadway. Margaret explained it away as our commitment to quality infrastructure. Meanwhile, the real consequences of Margaret's theft began to materialize across Oakridge. The public library reduced its hours. The community pool closed 2 summers in a row due to budget constraints. The fire department operated with equipment 10 years past its recommended replacement date. Road repairs were repeatedly delayed. While Margaret was accumulating millions, Oakridge citizens were told to accept austerity as necessary and unavoidable, explained Mayor Frank Thornton, who would later lead the city's recovery efforts. The most devastating aspect wasn't just the money taken, it was the community services that never materialized because of her greed. With her position secure and her system refined, Margaret was ready to expand her operation to its next phase, building her secret empire. With her embezzlement system running smoothly, Margaret faced a new challenge: what to do with the money. Cash in bank accounts creates records. Luxury purchases in Oakridge would raise questions. She needed investments that would remain completely disconnected from her public identity. In 1989, Margaret made her first major purchase, a 50-acre ranch property in Wyoming's Thunder Basin. The property cost $220,000, far beyond what a city accountant could afford on her $38,000 annual salary. To make this purchase, Margaret created Horizon Holdings LLC, a shell company registered to a non-existent investor named Philip Thompson. The company listed a P.O. box in Cheyenne as its official address. This first purchase established the blueprint for everything that followed, explained real estate expert Diane Rodriguez. Rural properties in cash-poor counties don't attract scrutiny. Local officials were simply happy to have property taxes paid on time. Margaret visited the property twice yearly, introducing herself to locals as Mr. Thompson's property manager. No one questioned why they never met the actual owner. By 1992, emboldened by her promotion and the success of her Wyoming investment, Margaret accelerated her purchasing. She acquired 3 more properties: a cattle ranch in Montana, a lakefront property in Idaho, and a historic farmhouse with 150 acres in Texas. Each property was purchased through a new shell company with a different fictional owner. Margaret became a chameleon, adopting new identities with each acquisition. In Texas, she was Victoria Grant, a wealthy widow from Chicago, noted FBI agent Dominguez. In California, she became Elizabeth Reed, a tech industry executive who valued privacy. She created backstories as detailed as her financial schemes. The contrast between Margaret's 2 lives became increasingly stark. In Oakridge, she lived in a $180,000 3-bedroom home built in the 1960s. She drove a Honda with over 100,000 miles. She brought homemade lunches to work and complained about property tax increases. Meanwhile, on her growing network of properties, Margaret was building a collection of luxury homes that would make celebrities envious. The crown jewel was her Montana Lodge, a 15,000-square-foot masterpiece featuring an indoor pool, private helipad, and guest quarters larger than her entire Oakridge home. If you're finding this story unbelievable, hit that like button right now. And yes, every detail I'm sharing is documented in FBI records and court proceedings. This really happened. By 1995, Margaret's portfolio included 7 properties worth an estimated $8.2 million. Her ambition grew with each success, and she established a personal goal: to own luxury ranch properties in all 50 states. In 1996, as Margaret purchased her 8th property, a vineyard estate in California's Napa Valley, Oakridge announced budget cuts to senior citizen programs. When concerned residents asked why funding was tight despite healthy tax revenues, Margaret presented detailed financial reports showing rising operational costs and reduced state transfers. The risk of discovery increased with each property. Land transactions create records. Property taxes must be paid. Local staff must be hired. How did Margaret maintain these parallel worlds without detection? She came dangerously close to exposure in 1997 when a Montana ranch hand discovered financial documents Margaret had accidentally left in her lodge office. The papers connected Horizon Holdings to several other shell companies. "I found these papers in your office, Ms. Grant," he said, using her Montana alias. "They fell behind the desk. Something about Horizon Holdings." Margaret's response demonstrated her quick thinking. She smiled calmly and replied, "Those are from my investment group. We're considering adding this property to their portfolio. I'll take those, they're confidential. Thank you for your honesty." She fired the ranch hand the following week, citing budget constraints. By the decade's end, Margaret's secret empire had grown to 15 properties worth nearly $30 million. Meanwhile, in Oakridge, residents saw their public services steadily deteriorate while their trusted financial guardian quietly siphoned away their future. How does someone maintain 2 completely separate identities for decades without slipping? For Margaret Wilson, this balancing act required extraordinary discipline and calculated behavior patterns. In Oakridge, Margaret cultivated what psychologists call a gray woman persona, someone so deliberately average they become functionally invisible. Her daily routines never varied. She arrived at work precisely at 7:45 a.m. and left at 6:15 p.m. She wore nearly identical conservative outfits. Her conversations remained professional and unmemorable. Margaret's greatest talent was being forgettable, explained Robert Walsh, who worked under her for 12 years. In meetings, she spoke only when necessary. She deflected personal questions. She never joined happy hours. Most importantly, she never drew attention to herself in any way. This carefully constructed ordinariness provided perfect cover for her annual disappearances. Each year, Margaret took exactly 2 weeks of vacation time, always claiming she was visiting an ailing aunt in Arizona. In reality, these 2 weeks represented Margaret's only opportunity to physically visit her growing empire. She would embark on frantic cross-country journeys, spending just hours at each property before moving to the next. During these 2-week blitzes, Margaret would meet with property managers, inspect new construction, and enjoy brief moments in her luxury homes, said FBI agent Dominguez. It was an exhausting schedule, sometimes visiting 6 properties in 6 states within just 3 days. As technology evolved, so did Margaret's methods. In the early 1990s, she managed her empire through telephone calls from payphones. By the late 1990s, she had adopted early internet banking. And by the 2000s, she had created sophisticated digital systems to maintain her parallel financial world. In her home office, a converted bedroom in her modest Oakridge house, Margaret installed high-speed internet years before most residents. Behind a locked door, she managed millions in assets through secure connections and early virtual private networks. She became an early adopter of electronic banking, explained cybersecurity expert Nathan Powell. She created automated systems that could move funds through dozens of accounts in minutes. Her technical sophistication was decades ahead of municipal oversight capabilities. Despite her careful planning, Margaret experienced several heart-stopping close calls. In 2001, a state auditor flagged unusual payments to one of her phantom vendors. Margaret produced falsified documentation so convincing that the auditor later apologized for the misunderstanding. In 2004, a new city councilman questioned why road maintenance costs had increased 40% while actual repairs had decreased. Margaret prepared a 3-hour presentation with so many financial details and technical jargon that the councilman never raised the issue again. Perhaps her most dangerous moment came in 2006 when her assistant accidentally opened mail containing photos of one of Margaret's Montana properties, sent by a real estate agent recommending adjacent land for purchase. "What's this beautiful place?" the assistant asked. Without hesitation, Margaret replied, "Investment options for our pension fund. The Commission is evaluating rural properties as portfolio diversification." She then created a fake committee report to support this claim. Would you have noticed the warning signs if you worked with Margaret? The unnecessary complexity in financial reports? The resistance to modernizing accounting systems? The insistence on handling certain vendors personally? The locked office door and frequent late nights? The uncomfortable truth is that institutions fail when we place blind trust in individuals simply because they hold positions of authority. When we stop questioning, when we assume systems protect us, we create perfect environments for deception. As Margaret's empire grew, so did her confidence. And with that confidence came ambition on a scale that would eventually lead to her downfall. By 2005, Margaret Wilson had crossed an extraordinary threshold. FBI financial analysts later calculated that she had stolen approximately $350 million from Oakridge's coffers, roughly equivalent to the city's entire operating budget for 17 years. This fortune allowed Margaret to accelerate her property acquisitions. What began as a modest collection had transformed into an astonishing empire spanning 27 luxury ranches across the United States. Her ambition had crystallized into a specific goal: owning premium properties in all 50 states, a target she would reach by 2015. Among her most remarkable holdings. In Texas, she owned a 3,000-acre working cattle ranch valued at $45 million, complete with a 12,000-square-foot main house, helicopter hangar, and private landing strip. In California's Napa Valley, her vineyard estate produced award-winning Cabernet Sauvignon under a label named Horizon Reserve, a subtle nod to her first shell company. In Hawaii, her beachfront compound featured a private cove accessible only through her property, with a boathouse housing 3 luxury vessels. In Alaska, She acquired a 12,000-acre wilderness preserve accessible solely by private plane, where she constructed a glass-walled lodge offering panoramic views of the mountains. Managing this vast real estate portfolio required more sophisticated infrastructure. In 2007, Margaret established Cornerstone Management Group, a private family office supposedly run by financial advisor Margaret Wilson, another fictional identity she created. This entity allowed Margaret to hire legitimate property managers across the country, explained real estate expert Rodriguez. These professionals reported to Mr. Wilson via email and phone, all actually Margaret herself, working late nights from her Oakridge home. The money flow connecting Oakridge to these properties resembled a complex maze designed to confuse and misdirect. Margaret created over 130 shell companies and utilized more than 200 bank accounts, noted forensic accountant Reynolds. The funds would bounce between accounts, sometimes sitting dormant for months before moving again. Each transfer further obscured the origin. Meanwhile, back in Oakridge, the consequences of this massive theft were becoming increasingly evident in the deteriorating quality of life for residents. The $350 million Margaret had diverted by 2005 could have built 3 new elementary schools for the overcrowded district, replaced the city's aging water treatment plant, constructed a new hospital wing, repaired every road in the city, funded the police and fire departments at full capacity for a decade, created a community college scholarship fund for every graduating high school student. Instead, Oakridge residents faced deteriorating infrastructure, reduced public services, and increasing local taxes to compensate for the shortfalls Margaret created. The scale of Margaret Wilson's theft is almost impossible to comprehend. This single, unremarkable-looking city accountant managed to divert $750 million over 3 decades, funds that could have transformed the lives of an entire community. Comment below what you would have done with $750 million if you were responsible for Oakridge's budget. How would you have improved the city? As Margaret's wealth grew, so did her confidence. But as any student of human behavior knows, confidence often precedes carelessness. And carelessness leads to mistakes. No criminal enterprise spanning decades operates without moments of extreme danger. For Margaret Wilson, several incidents nearly exposed her elaborate scheme, requiring quick thinking and meticulous preparation to maintain her facade. In 2001, Pennsylvania initiated a comprehensive statewide municipal audit following corruption scandals in Philadelphia. State Auditor William Chambers flagged unusual payments to a vendor called Oakridge Utility Solutions, one of Margaret's phantom companies. "Ms. Wilson, we can't find any registration records for this company," Chambers noted during a tense meeting in her office. Yet they've received over $800,000 in payments over the past 18 months. Within moments, Margaret retrieved a thick folder containing business licenses, tax filings, and detailed invoices, all fabricated years earlier as contingency documentation. Oakridge Utility Solutions is a subcontractor specializing in water treatment infrastructure, Margaret explained confidently. They partner with 5 other municipalities in the region. Here are their credentials and work orders. The documentation was so thorough and convincing that Chambers not only accepted it but apologized for the confusion. The 2008 financial crisis presented a different challenge. As municipalities nationwide faced budget scrutiny, Oakridge came under intense financial pressure. Margaret recognized the danger. Heightened oversight could expose her operations. She made a strategic decision to temporarily halt her embezzlement activities. More remarkably, she anonymously discovered a $3.2 million accounting error and returned these funds to city accounts. This brilliant move accomplished 2 goals, explained Prosecutor Taylor. It provided desperately needed funds to ease the city's financial pressure while simultaneously establishing Margaret as exceptionally thorough and honest. Who would suspect someone who found and returned millions? Perhaps her most dangerous moment came in 2013 when newly elected Mayor Frank Thornton commissioned an independent forensic audit of city finances, the most comprehensive review in decades. Margaret learned of the plan through her network of city hall connections and took an unprecedented 3-day sick leave, the only time in her career she had been absent unexpectedly. During these 3 days, she eliminated digital evidence, strengthened paper trails, and prepared responses for potential questions. When the auditors arrived, they found immaculately organized records that revealed nothing suspicious. It was like trying to find a specific drop of water in the ocean, one auditor later commented. Every transaction had backup documentation, every expenditure had approval signatures, and every account balanced to the penny. How did Margaret evade detection for so long? Beyond her technical skills, she maintained extensive contingency plans for dozens of potential discovery scenarios. She prepared fake documentation for every phantom vendor, created plausible explanations for unusual patterns, and established emergency response strategies for various types of inquiries. Most importantly, she understood a fundamental truth about human psychology. People rarely question what they don't want to find. No one in Oakridge wanted to discover that their trusted financial guardian was systematically looting the city's future. But even the most perfectly executed crimes eventually leave traces. And in Margaret's case, her downfall would begin with something beyond her control. After nearly 3 decades of successful theft, Margaret Wilson's downfall began with something she couldn't control: the global financial regulatory environment. Following several high-profile money laundering cases, the federal government implemented new banking regulations in 2016 that required financial institutions to enhance their detection algorithms for suspicious transaction patterns. A compliance officer at First National Bank of Wyoming flagged a series of transactions connected to Horizon Holdings LLC, Margaret's oldest shell company. The transfers themselves weren't illegal, but they triggered enhanced due diligence procedures under the new regulations. When bank investigators couldn't verify the identity of Philip Thompson, they referred the case to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, explained FBI agent Dominguez. This created the first thread that would eventually unravel Margaret's entire network. Simultaneously, in Oakridge, a parallel development was underway that would prove equally devastating to Margaret's scheme. The city had hired 29-year-old systems analyst Zoe Patterson to modernize the municipal financial systems, technology that Margaret had strategically kept outdated for years. While transferring historical financial records to the new system, Patterson noticed something odd: recurring patterns in vendor payment histories that didn't match normal business cycles. It was like finding rhythm in what should have been random data, Patterson later testified. The same vendors received identical payment amounts at precisely the same intervals year after year, regardless of the actual work supposedly being performed. It defied statistical probability. Patterson brought her concerns to Mayor Thornton, who, remembering the clean bill of health from the previous audit, initially dismissed them. But Patterson persisted, compiling evidence that became increasingly difficult to ignore. The mayor reluctantly authorized Detective Marcus Rivera from the Oakridge Police Department to quietly examine Patterson's findings. What began as a discreet inquiry soon connected with the FinCEN investigation into Philip Thompson, creating a perfect storm that accelerated with breathtaking speed. When Rivera subpoenaed bank records for several suspicious vendors, he discovered connections to Wyoming bank accounts under federal investigation. Within weeks, the FBI joined the investigation, and the full scope of Margaret's activities became clear. The tension reached its climax on April 17, 2017. At 6 a.m., federal agents simultaneously raided Margaret's modest Oakridge home, her office at City Hall, and 3 of her ranch properties. At her City Hall office, Margaret had just arrived for her typical early start when agents entered. According to witnesses, she showed no emotion as they presented the warrant. She simply placed her hands on her desk and said, "I've been expecting this day for 30 years." The raids uncovered meticulous records of a 3-decade embezzlement scheme totaling approximately $750 million, documentation of 50 ranch properties across all 50 states, and evidence of more than 130 shell companies. Have you ever had that moment when your entire world came crashing down? When something you built over decades suddenly collapsed? For Margaret Wilson, 30 years of deception ended in a single morning. The quiet accountant's secret empire was finally exposed, leaving an entire city to grapple with the devastating truth of what had happened right under their noses. Detective Marcus Rivera had begun his investigation as a reluctant assignment. A 20-year veteran of the Oakridge Police Department, he had known Margaret Wilson personally, attending the same community functions and occasionally discussing city finances at council meetings. "I thought it would be a quick review to satisfy the mayor and clear Margaret's name," Rivera explained. "Instead, I found myself at the center of the largest municipal fraud case in American history." Rivera's initial findings prompted him to contact federal authorities, which led to the coordinated raids. The scale of evidence recovered was staggering. In Margaret's home office alone, Agents discovered a hidden room behind a bookcase containing servers, financial records, and detailed maps of her property empire. She kept meticulous records of everything, noted FBI agent Dominguez. It was as if she wanted to document her achievement. We found spreadsheets tracking every dollar stolen, every property purchased, and every close call she had experienced. The raids on her properties revealed equally shocking discoveries. Staff at these locations had no idea their employer was a city accountant from Pennsylvania. Many had never even met Margaret in person, dealing only with property managers who reported to the non-existent Gerald Wilson. Margaret Wilson, age 62, was arrested without resistance. As agents led her through City Hall in handcuffs, she passed Detective Rivera in the hallway and made a comment that haunts him still. "I guess I can finally retire now." The news devastated Oakridge. Emergency town hall meetings drew thousands of shocked residents demanding answers. How could one person steal so much for so long without anyone noticing? The $750 million Margaret stole represented more than 20 years of the city's total operating budget, Mayor Thornton explained to the stunned community. Every pothole unfilled, every school program cut, every public service reduced, these weren't just budget constraints. They were the direct result of Margaret's theft. In a plea agreement reached in 2018, Margaret confessed to all charges and agreed to forfeit her entire ranch empire and all assets derived from her crimes. In exchange for her cooperation in recovering the stolen funds, she received a 25-year federal prison sentence. When the presiding judge asked what motivated her crimes, Margaret gave an answer that sent chills through the courtroom. "I wanted to see if I could do it. And then, when no one noticed, I wanted to see how far I could go." This wasn't a crime of necessity or passion. It was a calculated experiment in human psychology and systems manipulation that escalated over decades. The aftermath for Oakridge continues today. The seized ranch properties have been sold, returning approximately $680 million to city coffers, but the psychological damage to community trust remains profound. "We've rebuilt our financial systems from the ground up," explained current city manager Alicia Washington. "Multiple layers of oversight, mandatory rotation of financial personnel, regular independent audits. These are now permanent features of our governance." The city has begun restoring long-neglected infrastructure and expanding services that were cut during Margaret's tenure. A new hospital wing, community center, and water treatment facility now stand as physical symbols of recovery. But for the residents who lived through decades of unnecessary austerity, the question remains: how do you recover from a betrayal so complete? The story of Margaret Wilson and Oakridge extends far beyond one woman's extraordinary theft. It reveals fundamental vulnerabilities in how we structure our institutions and the dangerous psychological blind spots we all share. First, the Margaret Wilson case teaches us that trust without verification is merely blind faith. Oakridge placed complete confidence in one person simply because she behaved according to expectations. Her unremarkable appearance, conservative demeanor, and apparent dedication created a powerful shield against suspicion. Second, we learn that systems designed by humans can be manipulated by humans. No financial structure, no matter how sophisticated, can fully protect against someone who understands its inner workings and exploits them systematically over time. Third, this case demonstrates how our psychological biases create dangerous blind spots. We instinctively trust those who match our mental image of trustworthy, often quiet, hard-working individuals who never draw attention to themselves. The impact of the Oakridge case has reverberated through municipal governments nationwide. In its aftermath, many cities implemented fundamental reforms. Mandatory personnel rotation in financial positions to prevent any single person from controlling systems long-term. Separation of financial duties, ensuring multiple people must approve significant transactions. Regular independent audits from different firms to provide fresh perspectives on financial activities. Technological solutions that flag unusual patterns automatically, removing human bias from detection. Perhaps most importantly, the case has taught communities to balance trust with accountability. The most dangerous threat isn't always an obvious outsider. It may be the quiet, dedicated person who has worked alongside you for decades. What warning signs do you think communities should watch for to prevent something like this from happening again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective might help protect other cities from similar schemes. If this case has shown you how seemingly ordinary people can lead extraordinary double lives, Hit that subscribe button now and join our True Crime Case Notes community. We release new cases every Wednesday, exploring the psychological dimensions that mainstream coverage often misses. Like this video if you want more stories about financial crimes that affected entire communities, and share it with someone who works in public service or financial oversight. The lessons here could prevent future Margaret Wilsons. This has been True Crime Case Notes. I'm Vincent, reminding you that sometimes the most important truths hide in plain sight, if only we're willing to look.